Hey everybody, Hunter back again from Showtime Studios. I got a request today to do a tutorial on how to address seams. And I think one of the big things that a lot of people have trouble with, myself included from time to time, is a thing that they call a ghost seam. And a ghost seam is something that can sneak up on you after you've painted the model. And a lot of times there's several different reasons why that happens, but I'm going to show you one of the tricks that I use that can, very much limit the possibility of a ghost seam. And what we'll be using is these are just two fuel tank halves out of the AMT dual drive Freightliner kit, the truck kit. And I've already trimmed these off of the parts tree. Now, these would have raised detail in them, where the cast-in fuel tank straps are. That is something that, if I'm doing it box stock, say for instance, this fuel tank here, which is out of a Peterbilt kit from Italeri, you can see the cast-in fuel tank straps here. If you are doing a box stock build, or you're going into competition and it has to be box stock, you cannot shave any of this off and replace it. Unless you get into what I call that gray area of the rules, where you shave this off and you actually replace it with tape. If you was to do that with tape or with a chrome pinstripe, that is within the rules. There's some shows that you will go to that will not be allowed. So, the reason why I bring this up is it does make a difference, because if you are doing, say, this particular tank and you're doing the model box stock and you have to keep this detail, the seam, the way we're going to put it together is the same. What's going to change is the way that you sand it and do your final prep work to it. Of course, you have to realize that when you go in to work the seam after everything's dried up and you have to work across the flat, that's pretty easy. But then you have to work up the sides of your raised detail, across the top of it, down this side, and then across here, up again, across, down, and then, of course, all the way around. Now, when you get to the bottom side here, that sits on the bracket, so you don't really need to worry about anything there. Or actually, this is the top side, and the bracket comes over this. So this would be the bottom side of the tank. Now, this is a chrome part. That's another thing that, I think there was a little bit of confusion over one of my older videos when I said something about if you're using kit chrome, you're being lazy. And I think that was taken totally out of context, and I might have said that the wrong way. What I meant by that is my channel is geared toward competition and building competition models. For you guys that build for yourself and just enjoy the hobby and don't do shows and stuff like that, and you want to use kit chrome, that's fine. But just remember that there is no way that you're getting rid of the seam in this kit chrome. When you glue these two halves together, that is what you have. It's a seam. You're not going to get rid of it. In competition, this is not allowed. This is one of the things that will knock you out in a heartbeat. When people go around and prejudge, if they happen to look, and especially, like myself as a judge, if I look down and I see these fuel tanks with seams in them, that model pretty much right off the bat gets overlooked until real judging starts and we find out if there's anything that's better or worse in the category. So just remember, if you're trying to use the kit chrome, the reason why I said that is anybody going into competition that is putting these two halves together and leaving it kit chrome and setting it on a show table and hoping to get an award, you're probably not going to get an award. And the thing is, at that point in time, you are being lazy, because this needs to be prepped. All this chrome needs to be stripped off of here. We need to address the seam, put this together, send this out and have it re-chromed or alcladed or spastics or something like that. So that's enough on that part of it. But like I say, on the raised detail, if you're going to keep that, it changes a little bit on what we're going to do as far as gluing this together. But the other thing that we run into that causes a ghost seam, when you put these two halves together, a lot of times what will cause that seam to show back up again is the use of this glue, or this glue, or even the glues like the Tenax 7R or the Pro Weld or things like that. What will happen is all those glues are made to melt the plastic, and that's what holds the seam together. And that's where the problem comes in with your ghost seaming. That point there, if you put a fair amount of glue down on this seam, this actual seam is going to stay very soft for a long time. The more glue you put on, it could take up to a month for this to come out. If you just sparingly go in here and put some glue on, that's okay. But when you're using these glues and that's all that you have and you want to use them, I recommend going in and putting a bead down on both halves, one up here and one down here. Put these parts together. Put a rubber band or something around them and set them to the side. You do not touch those parts as far as cleaning anything up for at least, 2 or 3 days. A lot of times, if I'm using this type of glue, I will glue right off the bat. I will get my halves out of the kit and glue them together. And that's when I'm using those glues. But a way to keep your ghost seams from happening, good old super glue. And we're just going to quickly get into this here, and I'll show you a couple things on putting this on. It's just basically running a bead of it down both halves. But before we do that, you want to prep the seam. And what that means is you want to dry fit these two parts together and make sure that you cannot see light or a gap in that seam, in that plastic right now. And in the case of this, I can. So I take a piece of sandpaper, lay flat down on my bench just like this, and I will take that fuel tank half and just scoot it back and forth. And then you want to check it and make sure all the way across this area right here on that flat that you don't have any shiny spots. If you have a shiny spot, that is a low spot. You want to make sure that that is dead even and sand it all the way across. This one looks good. Now we're going to move on to the other half. And that one looks pretty good. So now we're going to dry fit those back together and see if we have any gap in the seam. And yes, we do. There's a little bit of gap in that one there. So I'm going to take and I'm going to go back over the sanding process one more time. You're not trying to take a lot off. You're just trying to make everything flat and get rid of any gaps that you can see within that seam right now. And that one's actually looking pretty good. So the next step we're going to do, once we've got that cleaned up, we're going to go in with our super glue. And we're going to put a bead of it across the top. A bead of it across the bottom. We're going to set the two halves together. Now, if you have the locator pins, it makes it a lot easier. This one here does not have the locator pins in it. So what they actually do, see if I got a part. Yeah, I got a part over here. What they do in this particular kit is they use the fuel tank caps, the end caps, to center everything up. So at this point in time, I would take that end cap and I would set it in there and make sure that everything lines up and my halves are true. And then I'll pull it out of that side and bring it over here, make sure it lines up in that. And we're looking good. So that's what we have. That is the seam glued together. Now, if you prep this properly and glued it together with the super glue, you should not have a problem with a ghost seam later on down the road. But you do have to address the seam that is there now. What I like to do on this particular style of tank, and you can do this on the outside if you want to. If you have solid ends where you can't get into the inside of it, you can take your accelerator and just drop it and let it flow right down that seam. If you have it where you can get to the inside of it, you can drop it on the inside of the seam and let it flow to the other side. So you can do that either way. Now what that's going to do is instantly set the glue up. Remember that the accelerator will weaken the joint. Whenever you use accelerator, it is a weaker joint than it is with just plain super glue. But a lot of times for speed and, just time, it's easier to use the accelerator. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is now we get into addressing the seam itself. And I can feel it. It's there. So we're going to go in with a little bit of a heavier grit of sanding stick. And we're going to go right along that seam, parallel with it. And then we're going to start moving to the sides of it, to both sides. Now this is what I say, if you have the raised detail here, you cannot do it this way. You actually have to turn it, run your sanding stick, and roll the part in your hand like that, and then go, right up against the detail, right up against it over here, same thing over here, and then you have to come in and work the edges of it. Now to work up the sides of it, you can use your number 11 blade and just kind of lightly scrape at the seam. Try not to put a flat spot in it, and do it that way. You can also pre-prep this seam by taking a number 11 blade and pretty much just sliding down the length of the seam. That will knock some of the excess super glue that got on it off, and any excess plastic or anything like that, and that gets that pre-prepped. Then you can go in with your sanding stick and work it parallel. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to go in, and we're not trying to sand a flat spot into this, so make sure that you keep moving the sanding stick and the part to keep from getting a flat spot. Nothing hard about it, very straightforward process, and this will almost guarantee that you will eliminate any ghost seam that could pop up later on down the road. This is not going to be affected by enamels, it's not going to be affected by acrylics, lacquers, or anything like that. If I can hold on to it here. But we're going in now, and I'm moving the part. It may look like I'm sanding in one area, but I'm not. I'm actually rolling the sanding stick and the part in my hand, to keep from creating a flat spot in it. And I always prefer to do it this way on my super detailed builds. I'll shave all that cast-in detail off, and that way I know I can address my seam and get it perfect and get it to totally disappear, and then I'll add the raised detail back on. I'll scratch build that and put it back on. So we've got that sanded down pretty good right now. That's all looking good. Now another thing that I like to check when I get it sanded is take your fingernail, thumbnail, or something like that, and kind of go along that whole area of your seam. And if your thumbnail or fingernail or whatever drops down or catches in it, that seam needs to be filled a little bit. In the case with this one right now, we are looking real good. Okay, we've got that one. And let's see what we got over here on the other side. We'll go ahead and address that one. And what I'm going to do, and this will be off camera, is I'm going to go ahead and spray some primer on this. And then when we come back for the second part of the tutorial, I'll show you how to do the final prep on the seam areas, and also with the sanding of the primer. And that's going to be something that may change a little bit. I'm using a lacquer-based primer. I'll be using the Napa Colorline primer on this. If you're using an enamel primer or something other than a lacquer primer, the sanding procedure may not be the same. As far as your time and stuff like that, I can spray this Napa primer and I can be sanding on this within about 10 minutes. But that's what we have. And, we have pretty much, the seam is almost invisible right now on this. And see if I can hold up here a little bit closer if we can get a better view of it. You can see a couple low spots there where I cut the cast-in detail off. But as far as the seam, it has pretty much disappeared altogether. And the seam is, let me find it here, right below my thumbnail there is where the seam actually is. So like I say, with this super glue, it does not shrink. It's not affected by, paints or anything like that, primers. So if you've got this together, and like I say, right now, it doesn't even look like there's a seam in it. I see the seam on the inside of the tanks, but I do not see it on the outside. At that point in time, you're pretty much good to go. So I'm just going to go ahead and sand back around this thing a little bit just to get the rest of the surface prepped for my primer. And we are going to throw a coat of primer on this off camera. And it'll be the Colorline Gray Primer. And then when I come back in the second half of the video, I'll show you how to go ahead and check your seam to make sure that it's all gone and do the final finish work. So that's all we've got for this one. If there's any questions or concerns, just leave me a comment on the video. I'll be more than glad to help you out. And like always, I thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you in a little bit. Bye-bye.